third International Conference on Social Sciences and Humanities, going to be held at IUB, Independent University, Bangladesh. The conference is organized by the Department of Social Sciences and Humanities in collaboration with all other departments under the School of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. I'm Obaidullah Al-Marzouk. I'm a senior lecturer at the department, welcoming you to the session as the moderator. Very soon, I'm going to hand over the session to our honorable chair, Professor Nicole Georgiou. I don't know, pardon me if I pronounce your name in a wrong way. We're very delighted to host the panel from Western Sydney University. This is indeed a privilege and honor for all of us, listening from you on the title, The Rohingya in Bangladesh, Forced Migration, Problematic Repatriation, and Settlement Solutions. The situation is already fermented enough. We have heard a lot of words on the topic. So today we are actually delighted to listen from the colleagues from University of Western Sydney, new perspectives. So we have, as I mentioned, as the chair and discussant, Dr. Nicole Georgiou from Western Sydney University, along with three panelists, starting by Dr. Moshin Habib, Western Sydney University, speaking on forced migration of Rohingya and their first year in Bangladesh. And then we'll have Dr. Mubasha Hassan from Western Sydney University, speaking on Rohingya repatriation, the political context. And finally, we'll have Dr. Diane Bolton, Melbourne Institute of Technology. Pardon me if I pronounce your name in the wrong way. She will speak on Bhashanchor, a novel solution to an intractable problem. So some housekeeping issues. Each panelist will have 15 minutes, plus minus. Because of the shortage of time, we don't have, we can't extend it longer. We have back-to-back sessions. So I'd like to request the chair and discussant, Dr. Nicole Georgiou, to take over the session. At the end, I'll come again to say goodbye. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you very much. As per the introduction, my name is Nicole Georgiou, and I'm an Associate Professor of Humanitarian and Development Studies at Western Sydney University. I'm also the Director of Western Sydney University's Humanitarian and Development Research Initiative, and each of today's panellists is a member of that research group. This group of panellists have been put together because all of them are experts on Bangladesh. As you can see, we have two Bangladeshi nationals. All have conducted research on the Rohingya as well, and have a continuing interest in this area of research. I'd like to begin by introducing or providing a little bit more background on the panel, and then I'll introduce the speakers. I'll introduce each speaker before they deliver their presentation, and we'll have questions at the end of all three presentations. So today's panel, The Rohingya in Bangladesh, Forced Migration, Problematic Repatriation and Settlement Solutions, deals with the broader issue of managing the Rohingya within Bangladesh by the Bangladesh government. So Myanmar's persecution of Rohingya, described by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights as a textbook case of ethnic cleansing, led to a mass exodus of Rohingya into Bangladesh during one of the fastest growing refugee influxes in the world. The panel that you're about to hear from explores the experiences of Rohingya migration in Bangladesh. The panelists employ a human security approach to issues of forced migration, obstacles of repatriation and settlement solutions within Bangladesh. The panel highlights how the Bangladesh government has managed the humanitarian urgency within a context of global disinterest, and how it has confronted challenges of temporary settlement and repatriation as it has attempted to resolve the refugee crisis within its borders. Our first panellist, Dr. Moshin Habib, presents findings from the largest population study of the Rohingya within the first year of their settlement, of their arrival and settlement in Cox's Bazar district in Bangladesh. Our second panellist, Dr. Mubasha Hassan, unpacks the problematic political context of repatriation of Rohingya to Myanmar. He focuses on how the international community lacks the will to protect human rights. In our final paper, Dr. Diane Bolton reflects on Bangladesh's Basan Char project that represents one solution to the intractable situation of the Rohingya in Bangladesh, albeit a solution that raises several concerns over the quality of development options available to a potentially long-term displaced Rohingya population. I would like now to introduce our first panellist, Dr. Moshin Habib. Moshin holds an MBA from the University of Santo Tomas in the Philippines and a PhD in International Development from Deakin University, Australia. He has extensive experience working in several countries in Asia and the Pacific for the United Nations Development Programme and a number of international non-government organisations in areas of development cooperation and microfinance. He is the secretary of the Bangladesh Research Institute, a non-profit think tank based in Australia. Moshin has lectured at Monash, Australian National University, Deakin University, Swinburne University of Technology, and has had an instrumental role in developing development studies programs at the master's level at Western Sydney University, Australia. He has received over $880,000 in Australian currency in terms of industry grants and experience. And in his presentation today, he will speak with you about that project. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Habib.
Thank you, Nicole. Good morning, Dhaka. I would like to try to limit myself setting the scene with the findings from the largest sample refugee study conducted between November 2017 and January 2018. This would highlight the atrocity committed by the Tatmadaw during the August 17 crackdown. We commissioned this research project in September 2017, and I spent around 3 months in various locations and temporary camps in Cox's Bazar. The picture you see on the screen now, it's a place probably some of you know, or probably many of you in Bangladesh know, somewhere in the southern part of Bangladesh, a place called Shahpurir Deep. And this is where I had the opportunity to visit right after and during the crisis was unfolding in Bangladesh. When I was there sometime around early November, I saw about 100 women and children just landed, just arrived in Bangladesh water, Bangladesh land, and using this sort of a boat that you can see. And when I was there, I was trying to talk to them, and one of the local politicians or leader, perhaps, I don't know what his identity is, he asked me, "Who do you want?" And I got annoyed by this, and I was asking, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh no, I didn't say anything wrong about it. If you want, you can have any one of them, just 2,000 taka." What that means, he explained that I can have any human being, men, women, children, at any age for 2,000 taka. So that was, that unfolded, the humanitarian crisis that the world saw. The Rohingya people have experienced a history of repeated crises and are considered to be the most persecuted community in the world. The Myanmar Constitution in 1973 stated that started the legal process of delegitimization of Rohingyas. Rohingyas forcibly displaced between 1977 to 79, returned to Myanmar as lawful resident, as started in a bilateral agreement with Bangladesh. Instead of integration in 1982, citizenship law excluded the returnees from citizenship. The conceptualization of us and them intensified in the late 1980s by the Tatmadaw. That led to yet another exodus in 1992 and 1993. The bilateral understanding that was reached in 1992 also reflected Myanmar's commitment to integrating them into the society as residents of Myanmar on their return. But in effect, Myanmar commenced a new legal marginalization and by introducing white cards with the total discontinuation of National Registration Certificate, NRCs, to Rohingyas. Then we saw Myanmar intensified economic marginalization, denied all sort of business permits, land sale to restrict livelihood option, acquisition of Rohingya land, mostly without compensation, and forced labor. What we saw, another part was social marginalization. In there, we see, it was become order of the day. Gradual destruction of cultural identity commenced in earnest. For example, a 5th century old Wali Khan mosque was destroyed around 1997, 1999. Official denied permission or permits to repair the mosque, religious schools, so that they will all collapse. Hindus in Rakhine and some other places face similar stipulations. Rohingyas started facing denial of access to health services, perhaps with the aim of impose higher malnutrition, morbidity, and mortality. Access to
recording in progress.
Access to education was denied to incapacitate the community intellectually and to prevent educated and enlightened leadership from growing. The most effective of all punitive and discriminatory measures have been the ruthless application of denial of freedom of movement, limiting their movement to their own villages and townships. Apart from profound economic, political, and social cost, they were tremendously effective in discontinuing all of the educated Rohingyas' opinion building from the Rohingya masses. In sum, successive Myanmar government, with the help of nationalist and Buddhist extremists, implemented an intense process of marginalization to destroy the ethnic communities from all sides. You can see as early as 1988, the State Peace and Development Council, SPDC, adopted a Rohingya extermination plan. They succeeded in eliminating hope and sense of self-dignity from the minds of Rohingya. I will highlight a couple of points here. You can see from number 7, it says, to forbid them from ownership of land, shops, and buildings. Any such properties under their existing ownership must be confiscated for distribution among Buddhists. All their economic activities must be stopped. Another important one, you look at number 10. Whenever there is a case between Rakhine and Muslim, the court shall give verdict in favor of Rakhine. When the case is between Muslims themselves, the court shall favor the rich against the poor Muslim, so that the latter leaves the country with frustration. So you can see that was a well-intended plan. So you can, this slide shows the number of fires during the August 17 crackdown by satellite, UN satellite picture. The Rohingya people in Bangladesh currently probably 1.2 to 1.3 million, living in a area as big as the Shahjal International Airport, and considered to be the most populated area in the world, more than 65,000 people per square kilometer. So this is, let's go into that, the projects, and I'll just provide you some statistics and findings. So we titled our project as Rehabilitation, Resettlement and Repatriation of Rohingya. What we found during the process, a consortium of universities, international and national organization funded this project to go forward right after the August crackdown. So for the purpose of the project, we interviewed 3,300 Rohingya household, 34 in-depth interviews, photographies and videographies. And these were some of the major objectives of the project. I will be focusing on the first objectives during this presentation today. So the research method would take quite a long time to talk about. We followed an extensive research protocol to be able to collect data and to a particular standard, and we can just provide an outline of a research method in this presentation. We can see the study areas in one slide here, and on the rightmost picture shows the camp location. And you can see this is the camp, and this is how the different zones are created within the camp. What we used a map called Avanza map, so that the researcher can actually isolate or isolate themselves or work within a assigned zone of the camp. So if you've been to the camp, it's a very difficult place to go around, and it's very difficult to see if to make sure that you are not crossing from one zone to the another zone. So we had to use different sort of techniques to ensure that our respondents are not interviewed from the right zones and the place. So this is how the zones are planned on. So the sample of this study was 650,000 people. What we did, we randomly selected 100 households from each camp zones. So the principal member of the household were only interviewed. They arrived, one criteria was they arrived in Bangladesh after the August 25th in 2017. And we looked at various ways to ensure data quality, and data collection followed a rigorous process. Each interview took more than 30 to 45 minutes on an average, and it took us 3 months to collect this data. So we interviewed 3,300 Rohingya families, representing 16,000 population, because it's a household size that we'll be showing you off right in the next slide. You look at here, the quality control approach we took. CIs and the PIs stayed in the camp during the data collection at all times for 3 months. 20% random checks and 25% data entry checks conducted. There you go, the findings. On an average, it took 5.6 days for Rohingyas to travel from Myanmar to Bangladesh. Their family size is about 5.7. You look at their education status, 99% has no education. So you can see how much excluded they were in their community. During that, the influx of Rohingya, 3,300 respondents left 2.5 million equivalent cash in Myanmar. This means that 650,000 population left around 100 million USD in cash in Myanmar. assets are not included in this calculation. We can see here on table 7 what sort of assets type that we also ask them how many percentage has got a bicycle, boat, motorcycle, and other various assets. We look at their house condition, what were their house made of, what they used to use for cooking and lamps and for lightings. We also ask them about their current situation then in 2018 in the camp, health situation there. We have also seen breathing difficulties and skin diseases then because the camp's infrastructure was not as good as today, although this is far beyond a acceptable standard for human living in a situation like this. We also looked at 51% or more than 51% Rohingyas were suffering malnutrition due to inadequate food intake. You can see we asked them different types of food intake, how many types of food they usually takes every day in the camp. We also asked them, about discrimination, if they were discriminated during their, life in Myanmar. So 90% says that they were always discriminated. We asked them where they were discriminated. You can see they were discriminated in schools, police station, neighborhood. You look at bank, you look at hospitals, the basic services and the community where they lived, where they were discriminated and excluded. We also asked them if they were bullied in the workplace. Yes, 86% says due to their ethnic minority status or ethnicity, they were bullied by others. We asked them if they have been victim of crimes during their life in Myanmar. You saw different types of harassment they have experienced during their life when they lived in Myanmar. We asked them household treatment by state in response to raising concern. So they have raised concern, and if they have raised concern about their freedom, what happened to them? We estimated, that was the major findings, we estimated about 24,000 Rohingyas were killed, 18,000 women were raped, families were thrown into fire, 34,000 family members were thrown into fire, over 100,000, 114,000 people were beaten, and 41,000 received gunshot wound. We estimated number of houses burned was more than 115,000. And a number of houses vandalized was also more than 113,000. Businesses were vandalized. More than 35,000 businesses were vandalized. This is the table summarizes the atrocity they have experienced before traveling to Bangladesh. We also asked them if family members died in Myanmar as a result of 2017 incident. And yes, they said 917 children died. Core family member, you look at, and the number of deaths they experienced within that 3,300 sample size, right? Experience atrocities during the 17 incident, what sort of atrocities they have experienced are also been recorded. Almost all had witnessed neighbor injuries, and close to 11% had been injured themselves or had a family member injured. Some permanently, including loss of sight. Over 80% of household head of families had witnessed the death of a neighbor. So we asked them when they want to return to Myanmar. Overwhelmingly, about 80% said we'd like to go back as soon as we can. Under this condition, they want citizenship, they want persecution of persecutors, perpetrator, full halting of violence, or even peacekeeping force deployment. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Over to you, Nicole.
Thank you. That's absolutely perfect timing. So I think our first presenter has painted a really clear, empirically supported picture of the context in which the Rohingya were forced to migrate into Bangladesh. Our next speaker, Dr. Mubasha Hassan, will start to begin to wrestle with some of the complex issues around the repatriation of the Rohingya in his presentation entitled Rohingya Repatriation, the Political Context. I'd like now to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Mubasha Hassan. He is a Bangladeshi academic who completed his postdoctoral research fellowship at the Department of Cultural Studies and Oriental Languages at the University of Oslo. He is an expert in religion, politics, security, and migration in South Asia. He has published widely in academic journals and has recently co-edited a book called Radicalization in South Asia. Muve Shah has worked as a humanitarian journalist for IRIN News, which is the world's largest humanitarian news agency. He's also worked in public relations and communications and has advised various government departments in Bangladesh, UN agencies, and international non-government organisations. In 2018, he was awarded an Emerging Early Career Researcher Award by the US based on Common Ground Research Network. Mubasha completed his PhD at Griffith University, where he was also awarded this year an Outstanding Researcher Award. I'd like to hand over now to Dr. Hassan.
Thank you, Nicole, and good morning, Dhaka. It is a privilege to talk in this excellent conference. And I know some of my colleagues back home is also there. So hi to all. Today, my talk is mostly about conceptualization of politics around Rohingya community. And I try to unpack why the repatriation failed. And it is basically based on a paper. So it's a work on progress. And this paper I'm trying to develop, and I shall be teasing out some big ideas. And if you are intrigued by the argument, please feel free to share your opinion. Your feedback will be very helpful shaping the paper. The core premise of the paper is to offer a comparative analysis of two philosophical paradigms of international politics surrounding the response to Rohingya crisis. First is, in this regard, I will look into the concept of the responsibility to protect, or R2P paradigm, that is embedded currently into what I call into the secular expression of international politics. And the second is the religious international relations paradigm, or what I call Ummah paradigm. For this, I shall refer to Gambia's case to the International Court of Justice. And then I will, against this backdrop, I think it will make sense that why Bangladesh came up with its own kind of solution. So before I go into this Rohingya and R2P paradigm, I just wanted to demonstrate that this photo I took from a protest that took place in Sydney, where you could see that Burmese nationals are holding this banner calling for responsibility to protect in Myanmar. So what is responsibility to protect? The concept emerged in response to the failure of the international community to adequately respond to mass atrocities committed in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia during the 1990s. The International Committee on Intervention and State Sovereignty developed the concept R2P during 2001, and R2P was unanimously adopted in 2005 at the UN World Summit, the largest gathering of the heads of state and the government in history. It has 3 pillars. So the first pillar is the state responsibility. It places the onus on the state to protect all of its population, not only those it classes as citizens. The second pillar of R2P aims to develop a state's capacity for human rights protection through international assistance, normally in the security sector through police and military training and reform. But this needs to be a consensual approach and often used in UN and other peace operations. And the final pillar is international intervention to prevent 4 specific types of human rights atrocities. They are genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, and crime against humanity. This last pillar is often seen as overturning the cherished notion of state sovereignty. So why these pillars R2P didn't work in Rohingya case? So if we look into the pillar 1, the challenge for addressing the issue of Rohingya repatriation through the framework of R2P is that the concept hinges on the notion of sovereignty as responsibility, where responsibility for human rights protection is viewed as a base element of sovereignty. To put it another way, the state carries the responsibility to protect all of the people within its border, whether it recognizes them as citizens or not. However, in Rohingya's case, we did not see any leadership will in Myanmar that will protect Rohingyas. Therefore, the government authority and the capacity of the state were not used to protect Rohingyas. But what happened is they violated their human rights and committed mass atrocity crime against Rohingyas. So if you look into the pillar 2 of the R2P, it says that in cases where the host state struggles to fulfill its responsibility to protect, the international community assumes a secondary responsibility. And in that assumption that the international community will assist the state in fulfilling its obligations and failing that to take timely and decisive action. The term assistant here has generally been understood broadly to include a range of soft measures under the Chapter 6 and 8 of the UN Charter, which respect national sovereignty, including encouragement, capacity building, and protection assistance. The space for advice in Myanmar has always been highly circumscribed due to countries' strongly nationalistic inclination, general preference for self-sufficiency, and deep distrust of the motives of the foreigners. Instead, Myanmar has proven more willing to accept assistance from countries in the region, including China, Japan, and ASEAN, which all have taken a humanitarian approach to the crisis, which is problematic in this case because this humanitarian developmental approach underestimated the deep-rooted political causes of the crisis. Overall, 3 factors resisted implication of Pillar 2 in Myanmar. The first is the fundamental insecurity of the Myanmar state. Second is the normalization of violence during the military security operations. And the third is the propaganda of an atrocity justifying ideology targeting the Rohingyas that is embodied in Buddhist nationalism. And that brings us to examine Pillar 3, and that talks about international intervention. When adopting the World Summit outcome document in 2005, a large majority of member states agreed that if the host state manifestly fails in its responsibility to protect its citizens or those who are residing within the boundary of the state, the international community may take timely and decisive action of a more interventionist nature, subject to the rules of the UN Charter 65. Similar to international assistance, international intervention may draw from a menu of actions, and this menu of action ranges from mediation to public advocacy, fact-finding missions, sanctions, criminal prosecution, and as a last resort, applying military force. However, in Myanmar's case, we saw that military force, or this idea of international intervention, was redundant. And one of the major reasons was there was a great game of power going on in that, especially in the Security Council. China has blocked all efforts by the Security Council. And there are also other reasons. Unfortunately, the global trends do not favor R2P because there are criticisms of R2P in other places that were applied. And also it is a fact that democracy is in decline worldwide. And within that, the international human rights regime is gradually weakening. And among the established democracies, the ethos of humanitarianism is also weakening. So as we could see that international politics of the R2P has not, it didn't really work out at all. This brings us to the scenario 2, where we saw some international response to try hold Myanmar accountable before the coup. And that scenario, interestingly, as I say, it is a conceptual paper is on development. That scenario is a manifestation of a pattern of international politics, which is embedded, one could argue, into the religiosity of the member states. And I'm talking about the case of Gambia. Gambia that filed a case against Myanmar in the International Court of Justice. So if we move on, on 11 November 2019, the Republic of Gambia filed suit against the Republic of the Union of Myanmar in the International Court of Justice for violating Genocide Convention. In January 2020, the International Court of Justice in Hague ruled that Myanmar must take immediate action to protect its extremely vulnerable Rohingya minority, and the decision was historic for 2 reasons. Because not only because it may mark a turning point in the international campaign to hold the country's government accountable for an alleged genocide, it was historic also because of who brought the case to the court. And according to a report, for the first time in the 7 decades history of the Icssh, International Court of Justice, the plaintiff, which is Gambia in this case, was not a nation connected to the crimes it said, to the crime it said were committed, because it is 7,000 miles away from Myanmar, with little in the way of cultural or diplomatic ties between them. So why Gambia? I think it was less explored conceptually. And it also, which is quite interesting, is that Gambia has backing of the 57 members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is OIC. And those who do not know OIC is an organization that bolsters and that says that it is the collective voice of the Muslim world. So when officially OIC is saying it is a collective voice of the Muslim world, I argue that it also implies that it sees there is non-Muslim world outside too. So there is a distinction in the view of OIC that one could argue that it is manifested through their statement, which means that, it also says that it endeavors to safeguard and protect the interest of the Muslim world in the spirit of promoting international peace, harmony among various people of the world. So one could argue that the premise of the OIC is fundamentally embedded into the values, embedded into the religious identities of the politics. And it offers a window to realization of Ummah into international politics. And we all know, those who are Muslim, we know that theologically Ummah means Islamic Brotherhood. It really doesn't work, many argue, but one could argue that there are patterns that you could see in this case, that OIC offers a framework that we could argue that there is a pattern of Islamic international relation, where the plight of Muslim Rohingyas need to be protected by the Muslim states, it argue. And this brings us to an interesting comparison of two sets of political, we don't need to distinguish between two sets, but I think because it's a conceptual paper in developing, I think there is scopes to compare these two cases. And one criticism of international politics that why it did not fail, it did not work, is that you could see from this extensive quote, which is my last slide before I hand it to Nicole, is that the idea of politics is devoid of religious paradigm. So for most of the 20th century, the dominant paradigm in the social science on the topic was that religion would have no role in modern society and politics. The political science version of this social science paradigm, modernization theory, posits that the process inherent in modernization should inevitably lead to the demise of primordial factors like ethnicity and religion. You could see that in this paradigm, secularization of politics and sociological analog of modernization theory does hardly focus on religion, and it posits that in the theoretical paradigm that some factors cited in the modernization theory will lead scientific phenomena. But if you look into the Rohingya case, which is interesting, is that the Gambia's filing, I could see that there is a sense of contrast to this idea of secular expression of politics. And, responsibility protect is also an interesting paradigm because many people argue that it was intertwined, inherited with Christian ideas about just war and moral duties towards outsiders. But I think it's kind of got lost. And we could see that the international community couldn't really figure out what to do. And they were circumscribed with national interest and regional interest. And Bangladesh came up with a solution, innovation, that is Vashanchor in terms of, as the repatriation is delayed. And our next speaker will talk a lot about that. And I finish my talk on this note. Thank you.
Thank you, Muve Shah, for that really interesting analysis on the responsibility to protect, and particularly provides a very interesting framework of understanding for why R2P has not been a workable solution. In particular, some of the Bangladeshi government's ideas around the development of safe corridors to repatriate the Rohingya in Myanmar, back into Myanmar. I think also the Islamic political relations analysis is quite novel, and I'd like to pick that up again more in the discussion, because I haven't seen a lot of work with that that included in it. So let's come back to that. Thank you very much. I'd like now to introduce our next panellist, Dr. Diane Bolton, who will speak on Bhasan Char. Her paper, Bhasan Char, a novel solution to an intractable problem, picks up where Dr. Hassan's paper has left off. I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Bolton. Diane holds a Master of Social Science and a PhD from Birmingham University in the United Kingdom. Her PhD is in the areas of sociology and the economics and politics of development. She has extensive experience in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. And she has consulted broadly concerning quality and performance management associated with international and domestic business education, and accreditation. She is also consulted on higher education reform agendas and governance. She has a keen interest in cross-disciplinary and cross-sectoral program initiatives that require effective stakeholder management. Diane is an active researcher in sustainable business practice, emergent trends in development agendas to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. She also researches on responsible leadership and government as risk management strategies. She examines responsive regulation in higher education environments in her research, and she also works toward tailoring higher education design to deliver requisite skills to achieve the aforementioned agendas. I'd like now to hand over to Dr. Bolton, who will speak on Bhasan Char.
Thank you. I'll share my screen now.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Nicole, and hello, everyone. As you can see from the title of this presentation, the Bhasan Char project is being considered here through the lens of innovation. I ask, what are the features of innovation in the project? How much does innovation depend on stakeholder collaboration? And whether there are lessons in this approach and experience for a broader global audience. The Bangladesh government has been constantly reminded about emerging challenges in maintaining the welfare of forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals. It's been reminded by incidents such as the fire in the Balukali camp in Cox's Bazar in March 2021, COVID-19 impacts, the increase of trafficking in the region, and aggravated environmental degradation, all of which have posed significant health and security risks for the Rohingya, the host country, and the region. This was occurring when the goal of achieving assurance of safety for returning displaced Rohingyas was becoming even more distant. Nevertheless, Bangladesh received various forms of international condemnation over the past couple of years for their decision to relocate some of the Rohingya to Bhasan Char to decrease these pressures. However, the recent signing of an MOU between UNHCR and the government of Bangladesh appears to be establishing a more common protection and policy framework for its humanitarian response to the Rohingya community on Bhasan Char, and hopefully this will serve to be a turning point. So why are these insights so important? It's argued here that the Bhasan Char initiative might provide very useful insights into dealing with future global migration challenges. In 2018, the UNHCR noted that the number of persons fleeing war, persecution, and conflict exceeded 70 million, the highest level recorded in almost 70 years. Data released last Thursday by the UNHCR noted that forcibly displaced persons now exceed 84 million globally. This perhaps suggests that there might be a need for a new approach and new mindsets in dealing with crises around people displacement, including the responsibility of host countries, the rights of displaced persons, and forms of joint responsibilities by global players. Thus, the presentation appears consistent with the conference theme of notions and narratives of diversification and transformation, and sub-themes around Bangladesh as a humanitarian role model and as a role model for localizing SDG values and ways of operating in this role. It's been recognized for many years that we live now in an interdependent world where almost no problem can be perceived as that of one nation or even one region alone. As far back as 1990, the UNHCR noted 3 goals around issues of migration and displacement: the promotion of voluntary repatriation, safeguarding asylum whilst containing economic migration through poverty alleviation, and placing the issues of people displacement and migration firmly on the political agenda. But importantly, these aims were based on the premise that there was an obsolete security concern over Cold War. In other words, these concerns around the Cold War were over. Now, these principles are still relevant and have been reinforced by SDGs concerning the centrality of poverty reduction to this agenda. But the resurgence of a Cold War mindset in responding to the economic rise of China has the capacity to impact collaborative action concerning both displacement issues and the achievement of SDGs. Given the increasing challenges facing the emergency management of FDMNs, and I'm going to be referring to FDMNs rather than forcibly displaced Myanmar nationals, it's suggested here that the Basanchar initiative illustrates pertinent issues concerning collaboration towards innovation in the area, specifically the value of shifting the approach from an emergency response to a more planned environment that fulfills FDMN needs and associated rights more effectively. As can be seen on this figure, the major goal specified in the blue central area is to consider the extent that the Basanchar experience can exemplify how innovative and transient experience might be envisaged and designed for sojourners or people who reside temporarily in a place, whilst also it might align the interests of stakeholders. And as you can see from the diagram, three sets of factors have emerged from the published literature and research to which I've been grouped and to which I'll refer now. The first one are guiding principles and goals, which demonstrate aligned rationales supporting this objective. And these are mentioned in global compacts on refugees and migrants, international law, conventions and declarations, and the integrated goals between SDGs and support of displaced persons. The second set of factors, named strategies for adaptation in this diagram, identify the need for stakeholders to share holistic and systemic understanding of the issues, leveraging networks to rethink and reappraise the situations, perhaps reflecting on ways in which needs and rights are being addressed and aligned, and also stretching its economic appraisal to consider how the long-term value of joint asset investments in camps might be sustained to produce ongoing value to stakeholders. The third set of factors concerns challenges for stakeholders to innovate collaboratively against a background that I've referred to of geopolitical tensions that might affect both the drivers of stakeholders and their actions. So we might ask, how then can the state frame an agenda around which stakeholder collaboration can focus and adapt more effectively? I'm suggesting that it might be useful to see the Basanchar project not only as a one-off response to an emergency, but also as providing valuable insights into alternative options for dealing with an ongoing global phenomena. So first, I'll consider the guiding principles informing the need for collaborative responsibility briefly. Gaps between voluntary contributions of government and private sector donations and the large and growing needs of resettlement agendas have been recognised widely. Specifically, the Global Compact on Refugees of 2018 emphasised the need for more durable solutions and more equitable responses to refugee protection. In addition to financial support, it sought political support, technical assistance, capacity building activities, preferential trade arrangements, and efforts to address root causes and establish conditions in countries of origins that enable refugees to return home in safety and dignity. The GCR also emphasises a multi-stakeholder approach under national leadership through existing and new partnerships in a manner that fosters resilience and self-reliance of refugees, and that can also benefit host communities through access to livelihood opportunities and national systems and services backed appropriately by the international community. Finally, the Global Compact seeks to ensure that refugee responses are rights-based and integrate gender, age, and diversity considerations. Now, I'd argue that the Basanchar initiative seems to tick many of these boxes in its initial stages by attempting to provide a more durable solution for refugees in accessing sound housing, security arrangements, health and education, and developing additional employment opportunities. Many of these areas also align with the Global Compact on Refugees, but yet seem to be very understated in international commentary on the Bas and Shah initiative until quite recently. The UNHCR explicitly links forced displacement with the 2030 Agenda and SDGs, stating that it provides support for efforts to ensure refugees are included in working towards achieving the SDGs, and that they are included in the commitment of leaving no one behind across all goals. Aligning refugee policy with achievement of SDGs seems particularly appropriate in Bangladesh, where the impact of SDGs has generated a focus of policy integration and consistency around the machinery of government. I've argued elsewhere that the adoption of SDG aspirations has supported a more autonomous articulation of goals, policies, and outcomes by developing countries that can serve on occasions as disruptors to untrammeled acceptance of neoliberal frameworks underpinning regional strategies for development. I argue similarly that the principles of both regional and local autonomy embedded in multinational initiatives, such as Bas and Shah, is important for a host country seeking alignment with guiding principles that are also consistent with its political priorities and goals. Although the Bas and Shah initiative seems to contribute to the achievement of all SDGs, SDG 16, promoting peace, justice, and inclusive societies, seems particularly apposite as it conceptualizes and guides closer integration across political, economic, social, and environmental targets in managing forcibly displaced persons. For example, the targets of Goal 16 include reducing all forms of violence and related death rates, ending abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against children, promoting the rule of law, ensuring responsive and inclusive and representative decision-making, and preventing violence and combating terrorism and crime. The COVID-19 response has also emphasised that respecting human rights is critical in shaping responses in times of crisis and preserving human dignity. As in many refugee camps, a major challenge arising in Cox's Bazar has been that the vacuum of governance and the loss of political, economic, and social identity for FDMNs has created an environment that's conducive to breaching human rights in terms of violence, trafficking, and exploitation. This creates some paradox and tension between enforced governance that requires greater curtailment of movement and activities to maintain security, and a lack of governance that fosters black markets, trafficking, and inappropriate politicization of communities. Habib 2021 found that 29% of the Rohingya population interviewed had been urged not to relocate to Bas and Shah by other Rohingyans, including militia groups, influential locals, and NGOs. And as he noted, we should be concerned that unholy alliances between business and drug dealing, human traffickers, and money launderers also need recognition. However, that is not to acknowledge, and I do acknowledge that containment of activity in this environment can also limit communication essential for effective deliveries of services. So there's a very uneasy balance in this context. In the context of links between SDGs and the care for FDMNs, I raised two issues here, and these are around economics and human rights that I believe deserve more attention. First, in relation to economics, there was evidence that the situation of limited economic integration in Cox's Bazar had a negative impact on the host community through crowded labour markets, and the price of commodities rose by 10%, and daily wages decreased by at least 6%. The impact of COVID has exacerbated this situation. The establishment of the Bas and Shah initiative was intended to decrease such pressure by providing alternative employment to improve FDMN well-being in line with the intention of SDG 16. In so doing, the government appears to have shifted its thinking. Rather than initially seeing the development of infrastructure as inappropriately attracting FDMNs, or at least in danger of doing that, it now appears to recognise that certain minimum standards of housing, health, security, education, economic activity and employment will avoid more deleterious activity occurring in less structured, less safe and unregulated conditions. However, I'd suggest that this innovation could also reinforce its case by considering also potential economic efficiencies to be gained, such as identifying essential infrastructure as state assets in the longer term. And I think we can remind ourselves that the global impact on refugees appears to welcome investment that benefits both host and displaced persons in this context. The Bhasan Char initiative also holds the potential for exploring whether more sustainable and effective collaboration between stakeholders might extend to a more viable integration of relative and universal rights in context. Despite the recent MOU, some rights organisations continue to restate their scepticism about concerning safety, voluntary relocation and the rights to Cox's Bazar, and I think even have suggested that the MOU should be delayed until certain of these issues can be finitely resolved in this context. It's the finite resolution, I suppose, that I'm really concerned about in that particular demand. Because although it's important to consider different stakeholder perspectives, and especially human rights organisations, in the appraisal of what we might be calling innovation, these organisations also face immediate challenges, as do other stakeholders, in managing FDMN's rights to safety and welfare in very dynamic and unpredictable conditions. Thus, there appears to be risk in assuming that all those fleeing war and persecution wish to stay close to home, despite the deteriorating conditions in which they're living. And I suppose I see labelling Bhasan Char as an island jail, which has been done by some rights organisations, based on limited data, might not help the achievement of a more holistic solution. Human rights are an essential conversation, but not the only one, and certainly require a nuanced appreciation of the factors affecting perceived rights in different contexts. Though it's important to consider broad stakeholder perspectives shaping the appraisal of innovation, the Swiss government's marking of the 60-year anniversary of the UDHR arrived at important conclusions, which I think are very relevant to this discussion, and particularly the issue that I've just discussed about the contextuality of rights. They suggested that action requires not only accountability for violating human rights, but also positive action to progress them. That poverty is by far the most systematic and dramatic violator of human rights, and that still seems to be the case in the camps we're talking about for displaced persons, and that response requires shared responsibility based on an increasingly shared mindset between state and non-state actors. I would argue that there's still very limited focus on how stakeholders might better align perspectives in context, but it's an important issue for focus. So the shift in appraisals of Bhasan Char are diverse and conflicting. However, to recap, recent commentary supports recognition of the achievement of some enhanced individual and group rights for Bhasan Char dwellers. By August 2021, the government claimed the Bhasan Char initiative reflected a more holistic approach to temporary housing of the Rohingya people as part of the Ashram project, alleviating ongoing risks of landslides and floods in Cox's Bazar. Delegations of media and NGOs have publicly suggested that Bhasan Char offers living conditions many times superior to those experienced in makeshift camps in Cox's Bazar. 40 Rohingya leaders are taking responsibility to communicate the opportunities to others in Cox's Bazar. There's now evidence that the conditions may exceed UN standards in a number of respects, including security, space, health, education, and initial infrastructure to support livelihood and economic activities. And on that basis, the UNGA president has described the improved quality of care on Bhasan Char as in many forms exemplary. The Bangladesh government's invested significant and scarce resources to provide conditions that are superior in some ways to those of its own citizens residing in adjacent chars and in other coastal locations. Perhaps this journey suggests the need for a more shared and systematic understanding at the planning stage of innovation that facilitates more local and culturally relativistic goals and perspectives. But this is a difficult one. The figure presented earlier suggests that innovative transient environments will challenge stakeholders to review their own mindsets and stakes against those of others in the process of seeking new solutions. Questions that arise in the Basan Char initiative include whether such solutions can be seen as both transient for those involved, but also as reducing costs to hosts if perceived as ongoing assets. How a more holistic and systemic appreciation of conditions, benefits, opportunities, risks, and governance might be shared across stakeholders, particularly those with responsibilities for assessing accountability to guiding principles and goals. How stakeholders might better share and communicate to achieve a more pragmatic and evidence-based understanding of the situation. How stakeholders might apply principles of intercultural integration to take action in situations in which there are few precedents for mutually agreed norms. And in raising that final point, I might just focus on for a second on Evanoff in 2006, who notes that cross-cultural dialogue is undertaken not to arrive at universal ways of thinking, but to arrive at measures of agreement that enable people to successfully interact with each other across cultural boundaries. Such understanding seems pertinent when there's dangers of further polarity in thinking and practice, given the re-emergence of Cold War rhetoric and tensions. A reversion to Cold War geopolitics threatens to politicise what has previously been acknowledged by the World Bank as the need for synergised and collaborative activities to allow a more autonomous South to seek alternative regional development strategies to achieve SDGs. We've noted these principles earlier in the context of the Global Compact on Refugees, in engaging a wider range of states and other partners in response to displacement situations by embracing a multi-stakeholder approach under national leadership. Ex-President Trump clearly stated that the future does not belong to globalists, but to patriots. President Biden's approach in response to China's BRI has been to lead the G7 to adopt the Build Back a Better World, B3W initiative, which has made more transparent the resurgence of competitive mindsets with the purpose of influencing development philosophies and agendas globally. Conditionality on development aid and global support has the potential to become a key point of tension and differentiation between the North and South. This contrasts with perceptions made by some of China's approach to development, which has been described as non-interventionist in philosophy outside the trade partnership, respectful of SDGs, and as collaborative rather than competitively based in its approach to trade. Tishmir and Ramin in 2019 have coined the term normative legitimacy as characterizing Chinese development assistance compared to what they describe as regime-centric alternatives. I suggested earlier that SDGs have provided a framework for developing nations to plan, measure and report progress within and across portfolios, and legitimated a more autonomous approach to identifying development priorities and approaches. I see a flow over of this mindset to Bangladesh's approach to the introduction of the Basan Char project to improve the well-being of a section of the Rohingya community and adjacent host communities. I'd also like to draw attention to the fact that there's much evidence of the increasing experience and emerging skills of developing countries, including Bangladesh, in managing international and geopolitical tensions in strategic and resource planning, in line with its interpretation of SDGs. Responses are often complex, iterative, dynamic, and pragmatic in the quest for multilateral cooperative initiatives. Outcomes have demonstrated leadership skills and process management relevant to this highly complex problem set. In this context, we see value in exploring how Bangladesh has since made and implemented such decisions in the broader context of public good, exercising its mandate to manage geopolitical tensions whilst focusing on locally prioritised development goals within the SDG framework. On this basis, it seems appropriate to further explore the lessons learned from this, from the initiative of Bhasan Char. Currently, we see three interrelated areas concerned with the progress of the Bhasan Char, exploring issues raised here today. These include: how might the principles of development whilst waiting and maintaining refugee well-being be explored through the SDG lens? Does the Bhasan Char initiative demonstrate in practice the need for a more integrated approach to a relativist and universal rights, supportive of local agendas? And can the Bhasan Char experience inform global partnerships concerned with the management of potentially large numbers of displaced persons to provide shared stakeholder benefits and responsibilities? The differences, in progressing the Bhasan Char initiative from an emergency to a planned approach to support FDMNs appears to have raised issues, including the differences in approaches to the project by stakeholders over time. I've mentioned that it's still seen as an exemplar by some of raising concerns about rights of FDM, but sorry, I'll say that again. It's seen by some as an exemplar, but it's also seen by some as raising concerns about the rights of FDMNs. It also raises the issues, what I've said today also raises the issues about ongoing communication challenges between stakeholders in achieving a more shared and systematic understanding of rights and needs, and also the continuing tensions around voluntary relocation, economic and social facilities and rights to leave, with limited discussion yet about how individual and group rights might be best served in specific instances. I think it might be concluded that improving process towards more timely and shared information and understanding seems to be an appropriate goal for the future, but one that could be impeded by politicisation of the dialogue around rights. So on this last slide, I want to talk a little bit about the lens of complexity theory and the implications perceiving these tensions through that particular lens. Stacey and Griffith suggested that in highly complex environments, such as the ones I've described, many tensions and paradoxes are unresolvable and need to be held. And that it's more important for stakeholders to witness the gestures and to understand the intent of actors in dynamic and iterative interplay. The Bhasan Char initiative described here exemplifies this perspective by witnessing the complexity and dynamism of key stakeholders in appraising an extension of opportunities for displaced persons that enables those who choose to explore a different and potentially higher quality of life. We've noted some progress in aligning innovation with commitments to many agreed and contextual global standards that exist already. I'll finish by returning to Evanoff's work on intercultural integration, because it appears that further exploration of the tensions raised here around stakeholder collaboration requires a constructivist rather than an essentialist perspective to explore these stakeholder dynamics and opportunities for more collaborative practice. Hopefully, such an approach now appears more feasible, given that hopefully the UNHCR and NGOs will be operating on Bhasan Char more systematically after the MOU that I've talked about earlier. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bolton. Unfortunately, we won't have time for questions because the conference, we need to close off at 20 past the hour. But I'd like to take the time to thank our panellists for their excellent presentations. And I hope that the audience has been able to travel through the issues of forced migration and arrival in Bangladesh to have a sense of how the Bangladesh government has really struggled with the intractable problem of a population who really can't go home. So there has been a question from Nabil, who has said, what's the repatriation process looking like? Unfortunately, there is no possibility of return at this stage. The Myanmar government has turned on its own people as well as the Rohingya. So I'll leave that there. I'd also like to thank Independent University, Bangladesh, for inviting us or inviting our Humanitarian Development Research Initiative panel. We very much appreciate the partnership that we're building with the Independent University of Bangladesh. So thank you very much. I will take all of the questions and we will respond to these and return our responses to the conference organisers, and they can disseminate them as they see fit. Thank you very much. Over to the host.
Thank you, Prof. Nicole. It was a really enlightening session. Now, without further delay, I'd like to request the department head, acting Dr. Sharmeen Ahmed, to conclude the session and thank everyone. So thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. On behalf of Independent University Bangladesh, I thank today's first panel, which was hosted by the Western Sydney University. My special thanks to session chair and person, Dr. Nicole Giorgio. My appreciation for the participants, Dr. Moshin Habib, Dr. Mubasha Hassan, and Dr. Diane Bolton. This was really an enlightening session for us, and this is a topic. The topic itself needs more attention from the international community. So wish that this session or session like this will continue. And we are also hoping for having a collaboration with Western Sydney University very soon. We are in the process, so hopefully we'll make it within a few months, hopefully. So thank you everyone for joining this session, and I also thank the audience. See you in the next session. Thank you.